Well, hi everybody. It's a Sunday night. It's meteorologist Joe Chaffee here, and I hope you had a great weekend. We got a lot going on. It's not even the middle part of November yet, and we're seeing all these signs of things happening across the country with regards to the current weather conditions, the weather conditions going forward this week, because it looks like we're going to have now two coastal events along the eastern seaboard. We've got snows in the southern plains and back through northwest Texas and into Oklahoma and Arkansas, and we're going to go through that. And we have those horrific wildfires going on in Southern California. And unfortunately, with respect to the weather pattern, they are not going to be getting any rain. And in fact, they may not even see, sometimes if you get the right wind there, you get the low clouds to come in off the cold Pacific Ocean at night, and you could see some light rain or drizzle spread inland during the late night and early morning hours. That's going to be a tough sell as well. So they're going to have to wait at least a week. This is the time where they really want a trough, a deep trough down in the west, and maybe some sort of cutoff low down in Southern California, and they are just not seeing it. So let's get started with what's happening tonight. I'm going to come back to WPC's map here in a little while. But we've got some winter storm watches and warnings that are up, and I'm sorry, winter storm warnings that are up. So we're going to take a look at those. And here we go. So hang on, just give me a second here. I have to be the talent and produce all at the same time, which is difficult. Whoops, that didn't quite work out. There we go. Now we got you. Okay, so here are the current. I got a close-up view here of the actual current temperatures are overlaid on there of where we have winter storm warnings up in the southern plains and back up into northern New Mexico. So it extends down even into the southern Rockies. The air down here is pretty cold. You've got temperatures in the 20s and low 30s. Winter weather advisories that extend into southeastern Colorado, southern Kansas, and then push on over into a small portion of Missouri. And by the way, these are not all the advisories that are up at the moment. The areas further to the east, there are additional winter weather advisories up, and they are going to go up shortly. They're just the timing on them is different. I just want to take a look out to show you in the west. We've got the areas down in Southern California have not only do they have the obvious red flag warnings there, but they also have high wind watches that are posted as well. So they've got that risk on top of everything else. And you can see that the red flag warning extends on up the eastern mountains of California, all the way up the state, almost to the just about to the Oregon border. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon in Southern California. At least the temperatures are not crazy hot, and we're looking at readings that are generally in the upper 60s and lower 70s. Coming further east, just to give you an idea of what it's like here in the east tonight, we are going to have another cold night in the northeast and down into the mid-Atlantic states. Temperatures already down into the 30s. And before too long, we're going to see readings down in the 20s. This is a pretty ideal night for radiational cooling with clear skies and light winds. Already seeing some 20s showing up in parts of northeastern Pennsylvania and on up into upstate New York. So it's a calm, quiet night after what was a really good-looking day around here with lots of sunshine. Although it didn't make it out of the 40s, we didn't have as much wind to contend with. Now, here's the extent of all the winter weather advisories that are up at the moment. You can take a look at more of these if you'd like by just going to weather.gov. And those winter weather advisories extend out into northwestern Arkansas and a good portion of the state of Missouri, except the extreme southeast and the northwest and the northern part. The advisories actually extend into St. Louis as well. Not much going on in the east. We have two counties up in northern Maine under a winter storm watch with the system for Tuesday. We also have a smattering of winter weather advisories up in the northern Rockies, but nothing exceptional. And now we also have some flood watches that have been posted for the Alabama Gulf Coast, a small portion of southwest Georgia, and a small portion of the Florida Panhandle as the pattern gets pretty busy. Now, with respect to the snow, there will be some pockets of in the mountains up in New Mexico and in southern Colorado that will probably wind up with about a foot of snow, maybe in some of the higher elevation. But the lower elevations are certainly going to pick up every bit of 6 inches. And there are some amounts of 6 inches being forecast in North Texas, Amarillo. They're forecasting six for your city, and you can see 3 to 4 inches across much of Kansas. 1 to 3 throughout Oklahoma, except the higher amounts that will be in the Panhandle. And then the amounts get a bit less as you move to the east, generally about an inch or two being forecast across Missouri and northern Arkansas, and then extending that over into Illinois, the portion of central Illinois, much of Indiana, except the extreme south, and into Ohio. These, by the way, these are cumulative snow amounts through through Wednesday morning, 1 a.m. So this will, when we look at the Northeast, this will count what we're going to get on Tuesday. So for upstate New York, and again, the elevations are going to do well with this. Another half a foot plus of elevation-driven snow up in northern New York, north of I-90 up through the Adirondacks. Although there may be some snows even down to I-90, Albany, on around that 1 to 2 inch area, an inch or two across western New York. And then you start to get into the higher amounts as you go into interior Vermont, northern New Hampshire, and of course, the northern half of Maine, because after all, as I said, it always snows somewhere in Maine. But snow amounts there are going to be on the order of probably 5 to 8 inches, lesser amounts south, and then still waiting for those first snows down along the coast in Portland, Augusta. You have to go inland to see them this time around, but maybe with the system at the end of the week, you might wind up with some snows down further south. We'll address that, of course, in a moment. Here's the U.S. Satellite loop this evening, and you're starting to see as we watch the sunset go by there in the west, the clouds that are building up across Texas and into the Gulf states. And you also have the cloud cover that is back over through Kansas and on up into Colorado. We noticed this morning on our Patreon live stream for our Patreon members that there seems to be a bit of a subtropical feeder here of moisture coming in. Nothing exceptional, but there is enough of one, and that moisture is moving on up to the northeast. I'm just going to give me 1 second here, folks. I just want to check every time, from time to time, just to make sure that you guys are, I'm not having any signal issues, and thankfully I seem to have resolved them for now. So let's hope and pray. Let me get back to that U.S. satellite loop, and it is, this system is going to organize and push on to the east. In the meantime, it's mainly clear in the eastern U.S. with that big high hanging in, and the light winds and clear skies tonight. So a good radiational cooling night is definitely is underway. And on the surface map, I'm going to start putting this up when we do these live streams, because I think it's important that we take a look at what really is a good old-fashioned surface map of the United States. When I first started out, we used to hand plot these, and I have to tell you, it's an art to be able to do this. You certainly get a feel for what's going on weather-wise when you sit down and plot them. I worked with a forecaster many years ago, but when I was at the Weather Service, when I was in college as an intern, Tom Morgan, he was weather. Okay, if there was an example of a man that just weather was his thing, he was it. Born and raised in Brooklyn, and he would sit down every night when he worked. He would plot a surface map at some point of the night, and he taught me how to do that. And I used to watch him, and you used to get really a good feel and a good analysis for what was going on, particularly in a storm situation when you're watching along the East Coast for maybe you're watching for some kind of secondary low to develop. And remember, in those days, there weren't a whole lot of models to rely on. So you really needed to have a hands-on feel for what was happening. So I think, again, the surface map is a good thing to have. And you can see this evening, I'll freshen it up just a little bit and get the latest up there for you. This is from map. This map was drawn at 5:20. Was issued at 5:25 Eastern time, and we are seeing the surface high right all along the Virginia coast, and then you've got the secondary front that's pushing down into the Great Lakes with some more cold air into Minnesota, Iowa, and the Dakotas, and of course you've got cold air that's all the way down into Texas and Oklahoma, and you can see the low pressure that is developed. You've got one surface low that's analyzed out up in North Texas, but then you have that Gulf low that's developing just east of between Brownsville and Corpus Christi, right along the immediate coast. So again, you get a good feel for what's happening weather-wise by just looking at a plain old-fashioned surface map. Barbara Ryan, nice to see you here on board. Always try to give you a great weather forecast, so hope whether it works out or not remains to be seen. Jason Schaefer, people your age see a paper map like that and have no idea what anything on it is. Yes, that is correct. You youngins need to go sit down and plot maps and read Fuses and Mosses and all the rest of it. It's just I I get into these lecture modes at work with some of my younger colleagues because Joe Rayo and I, we seem to talk one language and they seem to talk another, which is not a criticism. It's just that, there's a lot of stuff that us older folk have absorbed and learned from by doing all this hands-on stuff. I think honestly, I think a number of the younger forecasters are at a great disadvantage because they know the models and they know far more than I do. Although forecasters my age, these young folks know far more than I do. They have all these models at their fingertips and all they talk about all these really technical levels and technical um, uh, indicators and that kind of thing and a lot of that is stuff that we never learned, and it's from that standpoint we're behind the curve. But on the other hand, I often say you can have all the models you want. You have to remember every once in a while to look out the darn window, and this is a good way of basically looking out the darn window. And yes, Wayne, you're right. These maps are now computer generated, so they're not. No one really sits there and hand plots them anymore. But at least people should look at them. I oftentimes will get observations out and just kind of sort of hand draw something locally, just especially when it's a storm situation and I'm looking for a low developing, looking for a wind shift, looking for an east wind and a north wind and a west wind, just to try to find the low center. So these are definitely all good things all good tools, the old tools and the new tools. Okay, radar right now, starting to see, this is as of 7:13 Eastern time. So, those of you who are watching later on, we don't have any severe weather around at the moment, but those of you that might be watching later, you should always check the latest radars when you're watching this on a replay. Obviously, this is dated, so you want to go to weather.gov and take a look at your local office, local radar in case there are any changes to any watches and warnings. You can see the snow that's breaking out in streaks through Colorado and New Mexico, across Kansas and into Missouri, and then there's some precip aloft showing up in parts of southern Illinois, southern Indiana, and into Kentucky. So this area is all going to be part of this next weather system that is going to be moving along to the east. So why don't we take a look at what's happening this week with respect to the upper air, which is, front is always going to be front and center, obviously, in terms of the driving force. We always want to look to see what the upper air is doing, so then we can gain an understanding of what the surface, why the surface maps are doing what they're doing on the weather models. We've had these troughs that keep coming on through, and of course now we've got the next one. I want you to, by the way, just before we talk about our area, let's go back to California and take a look at the problem here, because you've got if you'll notice, the height lines coming in off the Pacific turn and go from south to north up into the Pacific Northwest. There's a big ridge along the West Coast, and that's no good. There's nothing bringing in Pacific moisture into Southern California. It's completely cut off. And even though they're kind of getting the flow on the backside of that ridge, they're too far west to participate in any of these short waves that are dropping down. The shortwave trough that's back through, for example, back through Texas and into New Mexico with the developing storm that we're seeing now, that's no good for them. And running through the jet stream into the rest of the week, I mean, the ridge weakens a little bit, but we got to get some kind of shortwave. There's a little shortwave here at the end of the week on Friday. And then there's a stronger cutoff that the model drives into California about a week from tomorrow. So until then, it might wind up being dry straight through, unless we get some low level, some low cloudiness and drizzle and fog to come in from the Pacific Ocean and work its way inland, which it can do sometimes, but that doesn't produce a lot in terms of rain. It does moisten up the atmosphere, which certainly can't hurt the wildfire situation, can't make it worse. But what they really need is a good old-fashioned low coming into California with a strong cold front. And with a pattern like this, it's just not happening with that ridge that's out in the west. Now, back to us here in the for us as we watch this system evolve. Of course, we were debating, if you remember, days ago, and I'm bringing this up because I was wrong. I didn't necessarily believe the fact that the southern part of this trough was going to separate as the north swung around, and that is indeed what is happening. In fact, we've got the trough in the east. If you think back to last week, that was supposed to be amplified all the way down into northern Florida. Is not at all. And I think there's two reasons for this. First off, you've got this big Atlantic ridge that's sitting out here. It's a flat ridge. In other words, it's oriented east-west. It's not building up north-south. So it's very flat and stretched out across the Atlantic in a narrow zone between 20 north and about 30 north. But we also have this possible tropical system that the Hurricane Center is talking about. They've now raised this probability, by the way, to a 70% development in the next 5 days. And we still do have some, but not all weather models are doing something with this. The GFS is, but the European really is not doing all that much. And the thing is, this tropical system is having some impact on the overall pattern out in the Atlantic. It's impacting that ridge, the outflow. If there's developing outflow from this, it could wind up strengthening that ridge somewhat. Or perhaps the western part of the ridge could wind up eroding as it moves more toward the west-northwest. So there are impacts here, and they could play a role with regards to the end of the week. Now, we get our system to come through on Tuesday because that trough moves through and lifts out. Some drier, colder air comes in, but it's not of the magnitude of what we saw back days ago when it was bringing 20s down into northern Florida. Now you've got this second rather vigorous upper low from what's being left behind swinging into the Gulf states. And at the same time now, watch what's happening in central Canada. You've got a strong shortwave, another strong shortwave trough that is driving southward. And this is going to be very important in that it's going to pick this system up and lift it up the East Coast. You can you can see, you can just watch the motion with that trough. You see how it comes down and it just lifts it out. So there's the, there's the upper low, and there's that next trough that it digs down into Minnesota in the northern plains. So it lifts it right up and out, and then you get that whole trough just swings down and around. So now the models are indicating that perhaps next weekend, particularly a week from today, you're going to have the trough in the east extending all the way down into the southeast and northern Florida. And that cold shot might be the one that sort of overwhelms all of the eastern states. Now, once that goes by, that trough lifts up. Uh, you still have yet another trough being indicated around day 10. We're now through Thanksgiving week. And I would say, if you look at this, it's hard to envision how a warm-up's going to occur if we continue to see the trough in the east. And what's remarkable is how the weather models went from indicating that we were going to get into some kind of ridge position this week, and it is now flipped back to the idea of a trough in the east and a ridge up in the Pacific Northwest. By the way, you are starting to see, systems, vigorous systems, late in the period, at least being indicated around days 8, 9, and 10. You start to have these systems starting to come into California. So this is what you see here. This is at day 9 and 10, assuming it verifies. This vigorous upper low coming into Southern California, that's what they need now, and they're not going to get it. I also would like to point out, and this might be important for the long range as well. There's evidence, as there always seems to be. I think the GFS has predicted 20 out of the last 2 blocking patterns that we've had. It always seems to want to create blocking patterns, and yet it never seems to get there. We are getting indications from the longer range that may be the case. We'll see. But we do see, if you look on this model run, you do start to see rising pressures across Greenland coming in from Europe. There is a bit of blocking that's showing up there. When we go into the long range, you see it right here. There's a blocking high that's pushing westward from Scandinavia towards Greenland. That's probably helping to keep the idea of the trough of troughing in the eastern part of the United States. To me, when I look at the longer range, I'm thinking the pattern looks very, very busy, and right through the end of the month. So we're going now, day 16 now is November 27th, and we're almost into December. I will say, for you snow lovers in the group, if we've got this pattern about 3 weeks from now, you're going to wind up seeing some early snows in a lot of places, and maybe in places that you wouldn't normally expect to see snow this time of year. But we'll get there when we get there. In the meantime, let's analyze where we're going short term. Of course, here's our low for tonight and Monday, bringing rains across much of the Gulf states into the Tennessee Valley. You can see the northwestern fringe of this is where you get the snow, and that area doesn't look all that impressive. The surface low winds up in eastern North Carolina. This is Tuesday morning when rain reaches New York City and into southern New England. You start to get into some rain, some elevation-driven snows in through northern Pennsylvania and on up into upstate New York. That low moves off the Delaware coast and heads towards Cape Cod by 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So I think the rain will be exiting from west to east, and of course the snow well up into upstate New York and into northern Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine will likely continue well into Tuesday afternoon, and then start to gradually pull out Tuesday night. Now here's that cold shot that's behind it now, because of the fact that that trough is getting stretched out and you've got this ridge off the east coast. You're not getting that plunge of cold air going all the way down. You are going to get dry, and you are going to get some cold air coming into the northeast, but it really doesn't penetrate. It will bleed down at the surface down into Virginia, North Carolina, but it's nothing exceptionally cold. If you look down on the lower right, near the southern end of the Bahamas, you will see a really kind of small system down there. That is the tropical system that the models that the GFS is generating, at least, and it seems to be taking it faster and further west with every run. In the meantime, you've got your vigorous system in the south starting to come out, and you have a very strong surface high building up in northern New England. And I think with regards to the end of the week, because it will be a bit, each one of these shots of cold air is getting colder than the previous one. So there will be some cold air, especially at low levels up in New England, with a high in that position in upstate New York. This is now we're into early, 1 a.m. Thursday. The question about whether there's going to be any kind of significant snows in the interior Northeast and whether there might be some sleet and ice issues down the road, and I don't know that there will be, but it's going to hinge on that high and whether that high gets out and moves out offshore, or does some of that high hang back. This is always a problem for the coastal areas of the Northeast during the winter months. We're always looking to see, is the cold air going to hold or is it not? And being that this is, we're talking about here now, this is November 15th, date-wise. We are still so very early in the game here. But the GFS has been kind of struggling with whether that high is going to hold or not. Uh, every other run seems to either, one run will hold it, one run will take it out to the east. This run has gone back to the idea of holding it, which I think would argue that we could see some sleet or wet snow at the start in areas not too far away from the coast, in elevation-driven areas just north and west of New York City. I think it's not impossible that we could see some sleet and wet snow in the mix with this. And of course, the high is still sitting over Nova Scotia on Friday morning on the GFS. It's not to say that it's right, by the way, because of the fact that if you don't have some kind of blocking going on, you are going to that high is going to want to go out. So it's responding to the relative blockiness. Let's phrase it like that. It's responding to the relative blockiness of each run. We also know, for those of you who were with me back last March and through much of last winter, that whenever we had any of these blocking highs develop, the models became inherently unstable. And you used to see, crazy swings from run to run. So you have to be really careful. These models don't handle, anytime the NAO starts to go to neutral or negative, the models start to get squirrely. So we have to pay very, very close attention here. But again, the obvious key for me is going to be with respect to the practical forecast, the practical nature of the forecast, is that surface high and whether it holds or it doesn't. I think a very strong argument can be made that the GFS is overdoing the high over Maine in terms of holding it too long and that it will slide out faster. But you know what? You got to be careful here. And you could wind up seeing a much larger area of wet snow and sleet in the interior areas of the Northeast, if that is the case, and also maybe even into some elevated areas down into West Virginia and Northwestern Virginia. That low, the gradient actually gets somewhat tight here, not overly tight, but it does get somewhat tight for a little while later Thursday night into Friday morning. I got to check to see when the next full moon is. Or new moon. I've kind of lost track. And then that goes out, and now you can look up for next weekend. You start to see cold air coming down back into the Northeast with the next high that drops southward into the plains. And then there's yet another front of some kind of weak front as we move into Thanksgiving week. I mean, I look at this, that there's a Thanksgiving, the Wednesday, if you want to believe this, there's a pretty strong front that comes through. This is day 10, so we know it's going to change quite a bit. And let's remember, by the way, that the GFS has this habit now. It's done it a lot for quite a while. It actually extends back into the summertime, where it keeps wanting to make these troughs in the east. It over amplifies them, so you get all this cold air that's being shown, and then and it holds on to that even when we get into the short range, and then at the last minute, it says, no, it's not going to be nearly as amplified. There must be some kind of error baked into the models, because this has happened many, many times lately. Like as I said, in the last couple, going back into the summer months, where it's done this. So I just wonder, when stuff like that, when the models keep making the same sort of error, you have to start to ask the question as to, why is it doing that? Why does it keep trying to over amplify these troughs in the east? And even the European has done that from time to time. So it's not just the GFS. But this would certainly suggest that Thanksgiving week will not be all that warm. Certainly with no ridge in the east, by the way, you're not going to have any kind of blowtorch. But the early call, if you want to make an early call out of this, you could compromise and just say that you'll wind up with seasonal temperatures during Thanksgiving week, and that's it. Here's the situation in California now, and we talked about these systems coming in. So here's the one we mentioned for next Monday. That is coming in with some rain and even some snows in the mountains in eastern California. So again, we'll have to wait a week for something even minor to come in. That's maybe a little bit more than minor for them. The stronger system is behind it, and that comes in later during Thanksgiving week, and that looks like that could be a significant rain producer in Southern California, assuming that the model is correct, which we still don't know if it is. It would be nice if we were a week deeper into the calendar that we were going to start to get this rain coming in now. But just to show you the rainfall amounts here, that the GFS is indicating at least upwards of 2-3 inches, but none of this comes today, and none of this comes until next Sunday night and Monday at the absolute earliest. The rain in the east, and let me get the wider shot. And then I will look at the snow. We're gonna look at the snow maps as well. So we'll go through Monday night and Tuesday. Rainfall amounts into Tuesday, right through Tuesday, on the order. The models have kind of scaled back a little bit as the surface low's a little weaker and a little further south, but it could be every bit of 3/4 of an inch to an inch, maybe an inch and a quarter to an inch and a half in some locally, some local areas. And with regards to the system for late in the week, and we can use the 24-hour accumulated precip for that, so we can separate the two. The first system, for those of you, by the way, I know for Johnny Quest, as you're always watching this, of course, it looks like a 1 to 2 inch rain producer here with the first shot, and now we'll set up for the second shot, which could be another 1 to 2 inch rain producer for your area, as well as for mine, as that moves away to the northeast. Now, if you're curious about what the GFS does with snowfall, I'm going to show you two maps here. And by the way, as always, I want to give big thanks and big credits to Levi Cowan at Tropical Tidbits for these wonderful maps, which you can access at tropicaltidbits.com. The GFS off its model, these snow maps, they're fun to look at, but as a forecast tool, they're very, very hard to use, if you could even use them at all, because they really just kind of reflect what the model is doing. Obviously, it doesn't help with when your local climate, it winds up having impact. You'll notice that it has the trace amounts even down to New York City and Philadelphia, if it's right, and I don't know that it is. Okay, this is again off of what the model is doing. The higher amounts, where the higher amounts are being indicated in upstate New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, I think makes total sense. Okay, that makes total sense. The amounts that you see down into West Virginia and Western Virginia, that really is going to hinge on whether that high holds and how much cold air bleeds down. And I mean, are we talking about, of course, obviously elevation is going to drive this. So, you really have to take when you look at these snow maps, you got to take them with huge grains of salt. He does have a map which is a positive snow depth change. In other words, This is supposed to take into account melting, sleet, freezing rain when it comes up with these numbers. And you'll notice that on that, and this I think would probably be a better map to use in an instance like this, because of the fact that you do have cold air issues to deal with. This is not like a system coming into a deep cold air mass like you would have later into December or January. So you look at the positive snow growth numbers here. You're talking about amounts that are half of what the regular 10-to-1 ratio forecast, which I makes a whole lot more sense. Again, still mostly elevation driven in upstate New York and through Vermont and New Hampshire and into the northern part of Maine. But I question the southern extent because it's predicated on the idea that the high is going to hold on. The European, by the way, the European, and let me bring that up. Where are you? Oh, European, here we go. So the European it's pretty much on the same page with the first system, so I really don't think we have to look at it too much. The second one, it's not that far off from the GFS. You notice the high Friday morning is sitting in Nova Scotia with a surface low sitting right on the coast of the Delmarva Peninsula. The GFS for the same time frame has the low actually sitting near Atlantic City, so the Europeans, further south, it may not necessarily mean much in terms of the whether that impacts the amount of cold air that's around. Also, notice down in the Bahamas, you've got the GFS showing that tropical system, which it brings into the Bahamas and then just kind of meanders it out to the northeast, whereas the European, the European might be missing it because I really don't see. It's hard to find a reflection of it. So here's the system for Thursday, where there's some kind of low, probably just off the coast of Georgia here, the one that's going to come up the coast. But you don't really see any reflection of the tropical system on the European in this model run. And, that tropical system is going to have some impact here in terms of the ridge in the Atlantic and how strong it is or isn't going to be. So we're going to want to pay attention to the tropics and how this weather system evolves. Very unusual. I mean, November is part of hurricane season, but we're already past. I forgot what the last Anthony Orr knows this. What was the latest hurricane has ever made landfall from the east in the state of Florida? I think we're past that date, so we don't have. If something were to happen now with that tropical system, it would be new. It would be a new event. And here, by the way, the WPC's rainfall amounts over the next 7 days, excessive across the southern mid-Atlantic states down through the Gulf states, but you're still seeing some the amounts of an inch, inch and a half to 2 inches touching up to about New York City and into southern New England. So basically, they're kind of going on the idea that these two lows that are coming up the East Coast, each one is going to produce about an inch or so of rain for my area anyway. And again, the big question that we're going to be resolving over the next couple of days and looking at is whether that second system is going to bring significant snows for the Northeast. You know what? Why don't we have a little bit of fun here? Since I see that PlayStation Boss brought up the icon model, and that is the German model. And you realize, of course, that we could go at this all day, and I could pull every model on Earth up here, which I'm not going to do. But we'll pull up the icon model because I did see a few people post about the 18Z icon model, which, by the way, was a very, very cold, wrapped up low that is off the coast of Virginia. And you can see what's on the northern fringe of that. But again, there's two things going on here. it is much faster. This is actually not that far off from what the overnight GFS run did. It is much faster in bringing that surface low up the coast. It also holds that high uh, up in New Brunswick. It just holds it in and just bleeds down cold air. I mean, this would be uh, insane if it happens. You've got a tight low off the east of Chesapeake Bay that goes almost east northeast from there. So that would just kind of allow cold air to get trapped and bleed down southward. It's kind of bizarre to see this on. I'm sitting here on November the 11th, looking at something for November 16th, to think that that could possibly be right. And if you just want, again, for laughs, what kind of snow does this generate? A lot. Okay. Uh, you know what? I'm going to tell you right now. The odds of this model being correct are so long, so very, very long. I can't even put it on the table. But just understanding what it's doing is that it's holding the high up in New England. Perhaps it's showing more blocking uh, in the northeastern Atlantic developing, and that's kind of holding everything in place. There is a big ocean storm out there in the North Atlantic that, listen, if it doesn't get out of the way, that ridge is going to hold. If it doesn't move, if it moves slower than what's being modeled right now, then that high is going to hold longer. So that is, that's why the icon model is doing what it's doing. Meanwhile, the Canadian, dear God, love it. I'm kind of surprised that it didn't bring this into Florida. Thankfully, it didn't. But I'm just, this model does tend to like to spin things up and do squirrely things. It does have the tropical storm on its view. This is again for Friday. It takes a surface low pretty far inland. Again, the high being key on this model goes off the coast right near Cape Cod. And that would immediately be a bad wind for the coastal areas, would go all the rain, and coldest air will just get pinned along and just west of the mountains there. And then you're talking about, snow and sleet up into central and northern New England and through upstate New York. The Canadian, to me, seems a little bit far-fetched with the idea of a surface low that far to the west. So I'm going to discount that as well. So again, we at least have, normally we're waiting till the middle part of December to have some weathered excitement on the weather map, relatively speaking. I would advise all you young forecasters that are watching, this is a good, really good opportunity that you've been handed to fine-tune your skills with regards to forecasting, because this is the first one of the season. We've had a couple of smaller ones, and of course for Tuesday, but you're kind of getting into the groove now. The preseason, like the preseason football player when the play is sloppy. That's what we're going through. The forecasters are going through, and you know what? Matt M. Okay, why it's a Sunday? Only because it's a Sunday night. All right, I'll do this. Why don't we look at the parallel GFS? See, this is why I don't like doing that. I'll do it for you guys, but to take a look. But from a forecasting standpoint, how many models are you going to look at before you finally get around to making a forecast? That's my big question with all of this. You got all these models; it's all fine and dandy, but at the end of the day, you got to make a forecast. You can't spend your entire day looking at weather models. Otherwise, you're never going to make a forecast. So this is the parallel GFS. What this is when they're doing upgrades of the GFS before they release it and make it the operational run, they run it side by side with the regular run, and they'll do that for a while. Sometimes they'll do it for a couple of months until they're good and ready to make it the main model. Perhaps they made some adjustments on the new GFS whenever they did the recent upgrade to correct some errors that they've noticed, and maybe they'll correct those errors and wind up creating new ones. So here's system number 1. So what does it do with system number 2? Well, it does have a colder look. I mean, I'm not going to discount a colder look here. Again, the key's going to be that high, which it holds in over Maine, and you get this cold air that winds up bleeding down. I still think, right now, I certainly would rate that as a long shot, and I certainly wouldn't forecast that from what I'm seeing right now. Obviously, I'm aware of it, but I'm not going to come out on a Sunday night um, to talk about something on a Friday with specificity, which was a word I was having a very difficult time with the other day. So I'm back with you guys on the chat board. I knew Anthony Orr would come to the rescue. Um, Hurricane Kate in 85 made landfall at Mexico Beach, Florida on November 22nd. Okay. And Hurricane Yankee was also in November, just past the date of that landfall. So, oh, I'm sorry. I guess I must have misread, Anthony, or misremembered, which I do a lot of that lately. Um, I thought we were past the date where a hurricane coming in from the east into the state of Florida, but I guess we're not. Central Park records from Scott Briller. Thanksgiving, the highest, the warmest 72. 1920 was the coldest in 27. 1930 was the snowiest. Oh, I'm sorry. The coldest was 27 in 1930. The snowiest was 1989, which I remember, 4.7 inches. You can doubt it with the Icon, Jason, and doubt it with the Parallel GFS. But I know the snow lovers, those are the two models that right now they are hanging on for dear life, wishing that winds up being right. But, it's the time of year. Scott Briller pointed out in one of this, a stat that he threw up, 6 times in the last 60 or 70 years that New York City has seen an inch or more of snow during the month of November. And that's cumulative, by the way. That may not be just on one event. That may be on um, a number of events. So you're talking about a rare occurrence once every 10 or so years. And it has been a while since we've seen accumulating snows in the month of November. I'm trying to recall. I remember in 95, 89, but the last 20 years have escaped me, so I don't know. Oh, well, during Sandy, at least maybe not for New York City, but for Long Island, post Sandy, 2 weeks post Sandy, we had three. I had 3 inches here, 2 to 3 inches here, and west of me, in parts of western Suffolk and eastern Nassau County, they had up to 9 inches. They had schools that were closed from Sandy had to wait another week to open up because there was so much heavy, wet snow, and there was no machinery to move it because all the everybody was working on restoring electricity, so they couldn't. They had no manpower to bring out any plows to get rid of the heavy, wet snow. Uh, so that was a weird couple of weeks because after that happened, I think everybody was waiting for the locusts to descend because that was about the only thing that didn't happen in that 3 week stretch with Sandy, and then the snow that followed a couple of weeks later was almost surreal, actually. Shelly Man Studios, nice to see you on board. You had some fish yesterday, which is good. I know they were catching stripers in a big way today in some places. One of my buddies went out and it was dead until he suddenly stumbled upon a whole bunch of fish and did really, really well. Ethan Bean, you gotta, just so you know, when you guys throw out the Weather Channel names for winter storms, I really don't know which ones they are. I think the idea of naming winter storms is ridiculous. So if you put up a winter storm, uh, for me anyway, if you want to help me out, give me the date. I did not get a chance yet, by the way, to look at those seasonals on the European. I've been so focused on the short range that I haven't had time. So and plus I've been doing a lot of technical stuff with regards to fixing up my new app and the website. The new app, by the way, is being beta tested right now. And if you're in the New York City area, if you're in northern New Jersey, Long Island, New York City, the Hudson Valley, the lower Hudson Valley, and southern Connecticut, this app will work well for you. And the folks on my Patreon platform are they've gotten it and they are basically beta testing it for me. So they're sending me comments and ideas, which I really, really appreciate. It's amazing the stuff that I can't, I'm not the most technical person in the world, so I don't always think up the kind of things that most people would ask for. So this is a good way to let me know if you're on an Android. I don't have it for the iPhone yet, but you need to be on an Android. Patrick B, what do you think the chances for Albany to see snow this week? I think you're going to see some. I think you might see a little bit on Tuesday with this first system. But again, most of that in upstate New York, I think, is going to be more elevation driven. I think you stand a better chance with the one at the end of the week. We'll watch how the models play out over the next couple of days, but I think the one for later Thursday into Friday. January 23rd, 2016. Okay, so that was the big one. That was the big one in the El Nino winter. Yeah, that's the one that holds the 24-hour record for New York City with I think it was 27 inches or something close to that. That was a strange winter with the El Nino going on. That the pattern, the warm El Nino pattern, that I think it was it was 70 on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. The warm El Nino pattern broke down for about 3 weeks during the month of January. So what normally would be the January thaw wound up being the 2 to 3 week stretch where you wound up with the big snowstorm that brought heavy snows to Washington, Baltimore, and on up to New York City and to Long Island. Didn't quite make it to Boston though on with that one. But yeah, I mean, even sometimes in the worst of winters, it finds a way. Ryan Kane, I think you got a law. I don't think Baltimore might be not going to happen. I think it's a cold rain for you. You'd have to really have that high get super strong and bleed down some that cold air all the way that far south, east of the mountains. I'm thinking. I'm thinking no. Um, just running through. I want to make sure I got everybody here. Yeah, again, try not to spend too much time and energy focused on the outlier models. If you look, it's perfectly reasonable to use an outlier model and nothing else if you are going to look at that as a model and then make the necessary corrections with regards to the forecast that you're putting out. If I only had the icon model to look at and I really didn't have anything else, okay, I would still make the same forecast that I'm making now. I could not, use that model as gospel, nor should you use any model as gospel for that matter. So that's why you have to, you got to be really careful with this. We could sit here all day long pulling out whatever model suits your bias. And I'm not, that's not a criticism, but you can pull out any model that suits your bias. If you want to find a model that makes a snowstorm for you, just look. I'm sure you could find one almost every time. That's not going to make it be right. We have to really kind of understand what's going on with the overall pattern. Scott Reese, how much of this pattern would you attribute to the blob in the North Pacific? Very cold cross-continental flow, very little blocking, if any, plenty of ridging in the West. You know what? I don't know. I was thinking about that this morning. I don't know what the impact of that's going to be. It's a big mystery to me what that's going to do. Apparently a number of people have decided that is the signature guarantee that it's going to be a cold and snowy winter in the East. I'm not so sure. I don't know. That's an honest answer. I honestly don't know what the impact of that blob is. And you do have that cross continental flow going on with the ridge in the west. You also do have warm water off in the Northeast Pacific. That's probably helping the P&A to some degree. But you know what? We had big snowstorms last year with a negative P&A. So with the Pacific North America Index with no ridge in the west, we had a very off the wall negative Pacific North America Index. And I would just argue that when you have these indices that you look at, be it the Pacific North America Index, the East Pacific Oscillation, or the North Atlantic Oscillation, when you have these indices that you look at, if they are stretched out to extreme positions, it basically, in my mind, says all bets are off. as far as what the usual rules are. If we have usual rules here when it comes to weather, last year was a big learning experience with that deeply negative PNA. We had that through a good chunk of March, but we also had a deeply negative North Atlantic oscillation. So when you're pulling all these rubber bands and stretching them all out to extremes, they wind up snapping and making big storms somewhere. And last March, for example, it was the east that got it with the 4 nor'easters. And by the way, got my 4 Easter cup here, which you can get on the Joe Stradamus store. Makes for a wonderful Christmas gift, and it's a big cup, so it holds a lot of coffee. Just so you know. And you've got all 4 storms on here: the March 2nd, March 7th, March 13th, and March 21st. So you can get these on the Joe Stradamus store if you'd like. How's that for a shameless self-promotion? Okay, so we'll be back tomorrow. We're gonna do our usual night live stream schedule this week. I got no days off planned, so I'm gonna be in every day this week, and we will walk everybody through this. Of course, Patreon members, for those of you who are interested, you can join my Patreon platform. It's just $2 a month. It is a great way to get tons of weather, and you also wind up with live streams. We did one this morning, which was just exclusive to Patreon members. And I try to get them done. I try to do one every day. It doesn't always work out, but I certainly do at least a couple of them a week. And once over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to get myself into a regular scheme of things with regards to that. So if you want and you're interested, again, it's just $2 a month. I think it's particularly useful for those of you who rely on weather forecasts to make whatever decisions you make with respect to, say, if you're a landscaper or snow removal, you work at snow removal or anything like that. I think you would find this quite handy to have not only have everything in one place, but minus all the chatter and noise that goes on from those that aren't really interested in weather and are just interested in stirring the pot, because we don't have those people on my Patreon page. So there's the link up on the chat board to that, and there's also links scattered around during this live stream replay or on the video that you can access to go to Patreon. Also, one other way that you can support my page, and this is an easy way if you shop on Amazon, and of course with Christmas coming and Hanukkah, and if you're getting Thanksgiving gifts, do it through my Joe Stradamus link to Amazon, which I am now putting also up on the chat board. Doesn't cost you anything. If you're shopping on Amazon and you go through this link, you buy your stuff, and Amazon throws me back a little bit of coin so that I can get a few cigars for my Christmas stocking. And we are a participant in the Amazon Services LLC Associates program, which is an affiliate advertising program designed to provide a means for this channel to earn fees by linking to Amazon and its affiliated sites. So thank you very much for those of you who have done that. I just want to remind you that there are additional website posts about the upcoming weather this week on meteorologistjoechaffee.com. And of course, you can also access more from my Facebook page, which is Meteorologist Joe Chaffee. And we will be back tomorrow. It's going to be kind of a tough. It's going to be kind of tough for me to do a Patreon live stream tomorrow morning. I've got a few things I got to do. But we will have our regular YouTube live stream tomorrow night, probably at around 7 o'clock Eastern time. I think that would be a good time to do it. So we'll see you then. And the Joe and Joe Weather Show will be back on Facebook on Monday, also, and that's at 9:15 Eastern time. So you got the schedule. Patreon members, you can message me directly if you've got any questions or comments. I try to respond in a timely manner, and I think I've had some success in doing that. Okay, have a great evening, everybody. Thanks for being here, and we will, hold on. There I go. Where'd I go? Right there. At least I can say goodbye this way and not with the graphic in front of me. Everybody have a great night, and we will see you tomorrow.